Today is the deal that got away. And
Hey,
your hosts.
yes. So welcome to the show. I'm Meg Mishak. This is Nick Thicket, and this is the deal that got away, where we feature some of the best names in sales and also get vulnerable. So we're not only going to be talking about the wins and everything you should be doing, could be doing, but also some of the things that aren't working, some of the things that the biggest challenges you have, the biggest deal that didn't happen, and especially that those prospects that you just cannot get into. So we're going to be talking a lot about losses and what we can learn from them and how we can use them to build better pipelines and to close more deals.
Yeah, and each week, unlike most of the stuff, instead of going into theory and the wonderful and nice to have, which sales sometimes likes to dwell in a little too much, we feature a real deal with a real seller that talks about that deal that got away. Now, this deal is an interesting one. So please, everyone, get in the chat. If there's someone you know that should be here, comment. And then we're going to introduce our guest, which you're definitely going to want to be here for. But this rep had the perfect deal. It's supposed to be high 5 figures, high 6 figures. Everybody had been working on it. Nothing really happened. And she just broke in. And not only did she break in, but she had this really solid challenger-esque messaging that broke through. She sent it to the top 3 senior decision makers and got the meeting. It's interesting though. I'll just kind of add this in because I fun for later, but got the meeting, but they didn't actually they didn't respond. They actually just used the booking link and didn't say anything. They got to the meeting with this perfect decision maker, had an actually great conversation, built the problem statement, actually built a business case, a solid business case with numbers attached. There was high energy in the room, even introductions to people that were going to help facilitate this deal. They get out. She sends over the document, sends over the details. Nothing. Completely dark. Out of nowhere. No, nothing. And it doesn't matter what she's tried, she cannot get somebody to respond. So, guys, what do we do? So this rep try to salvage the deal that disappeared? Or should we let the sales tail fly away to be carried on another day? What do you think? Throw it in the chat. Hey, Eva. Okay. Megan.
I'm glad that we have a guest coach this week because I'm like stuck on this one because the things that I normally would ask are kind of some of them are answered. Um, so who do we have? Who do we have this week?
So I'm a little green with envy of who this wonderful, incredible person is because she always looks better on camera than me. And not only does she look better on camera, she sounds better too. So, like I said, you're going to want to stay here for this. And I thought she would be perfect for this one because she is the video prospecting queen. So, talking about how to go and re engage an account if we decide to,
Mhm.
this is the person that I would have handpicked to work with me to do this. So the beautiful, the wonderful Melissa Gaglione, and you guys may have known that she has a wicked video prospecting course, but let's bring her on and maybe we can learn a couple other interesting tidbits.
Hi, that was such a nice introduction. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Like Nick, how long have you been playing this joke, Green with Envy? You have like the props, like everything is set up.
Well, I tested it. It just kind of came to me and I tested it almost like improv style with Melissa when we were waiting for you in the green
Oh my
room.
gosh, I love it.
And I'm like, you know what? Landed well. Gonna keep it. Let's run.
It's great. It was great. I love it. I'm gonna I'm gonna have to steal that next time. Melissa, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're at in your sales role, and what you do.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to join. Very exciting. First time I'm on this show, so fun. Let's see, a little bit about myself. My name is Melissa Gaglione. I'm an account executive at Deal, the fastest growing SaaS company in history.
It's
And I help
crazy.
lead. It's such a
Wow.
wild company. It's such a wild company. Just the
Rocket
growth,
ship.
the products, the success, the execution. It's definitely one to have your eyes on, and one that I hope to be with for a very long time because I'm pretty much obsessed with them. I really am. Eat, sleep, breathe, deal, and close deals. But so my name is Melissa. I work at Deal. It's a really amazing company, and I was the first rep hired to help figure out our global payroll solution and how we bring that to market, how we sell it, because the product is fire. It's so good. First of its kind, but how do we sell something like this? We're going after a new ICP. We're having to engage new types of decision makers. It's a little bit more of a strategic sale. So how do we have all of these different stakeholders from all over the world be able to really understand what the mission is? What are the next steps to get closer to that mission? What is the good, the bad, the ugly, what's amazing, what's not amazing? Like I like being very transparent and very clear. And then just getting everyone aligned to see the true value of how we can really support them pay their employees globally. So
Mm.
it's what I'm working on right now. We're starting to, be more involved in as many deals as possible. So seeing anything from SMB to mid-market to enterprise opportunities, seeing all that, and then supporting reps and core reps on helping execute and close those deals. So it's fun. I get to be kind of a different type of AE where I get to see all different types of reps. I get to support them in different ways, and I get to work with all different types of deals, and every day is different. So it's been really fun and very, very rewarding process for sure.
And it
I see
sounds like
that being
you're
tough with the, like, the different, like, geo like, the culture around the world and, like, the amount of research that must go into that so you don't offend someone or that you understand what the rules are, and then how
Yeah.
to, like, actually communicate that, and, like, in Meg's work too, it was like, "Okay, so now you understand and you've prospected in, how do you close the deal?"
Yeah,
Mhm.
but I'm imagining that you also have had a few of these experiences where you're like, "We finally got one. We're so excited for this meeting." And then it doesn't go anywhere, and you're trying to figure out, is it a messaging thing? Is it a targeting thing? Is it the execution thing in the meeting? So I'm really excited for your perspective here. Um, but as this deal is called the deal that got away, I'm curious, do you have one of those deals where one of those that still haunts you? Maybe you've probably done a lot of assessment of, like, what went wrong, what you think went wrong, and, like, what you would have done differently. Can you tell us a little bit about your deal that got away?
Yeah, it's so embarrassing.
I love those, and I'm curious, did it come to mind immediately? Was it you're like, "I have a lot of them, but, like, this one."
There are definitely it wasn't, the I don't wanna say that it's the first one that came to mind, but it was definitely one that I learned early in my career, and the prospect was so obviously, like, far away from me, in a not a sense of, like, space, but, like, mentally just wasn't, with me, and I kept dragging her through the sales cycle, and I kept pushing and pushing, and I wasn't seeing any of the, um, honestly, very obvious signs, even though she was saying yes and everything sounded good and it just the feeling that I was ignoring in my gut and the social, intelligence piece of it where, I could see that even though she was saying yes, I wasn't really, like, buying it, to be honest, and
Mhm.
instead of me really challenging or diving in deeper as to what she likes and what she doesn't like or what's really holding her back, I just took her at face value and just kept dragging her through the sales cycle, and by the end, I definitely, like, scared her to death. Like, I put a huge deal in front of her because I was really not listening. I wasn't. I wanted the big money. I saw a company that had a good amount of money, great backing. They definitely needed the solution. And I definitely was focused more on my pipeline, my quota, rather than her needs and what was really important for their company. And so instead I just kept pulling them across. So yeah, this deal does come to mind because it is embarrassing in my opinion. I was really proud during the time. I was like, check out these calls. Like, they're so good. And then as I became more of a seasoned rep, I was like, gosh, these are so bad. Like,
Yeah.
I can't believe I said that.
Okay, so it's so funny. A few things come to mind. And by the way, thank you for sharing this vulnerable one. I think a lot of times we're like, oh, like I know exactly what I would have done differently. But this honestly hits something. I was talking to Jonathan Mahon from the practice lab about this, about what him and his partner are friends of mine. Like I even go to the same therapist as a referral from his partner, Maya Rose. I don't know if y'all know her, but it's so interesting. They're both working a lot on, like, spiritual work, and they asked me the question of, like, where does intuition fit within sales?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when we talk about listening, a lot of times we talk about it from the tactical perspective of, I am listening to what you're saying and I am responding to that. But what I always find so interesting is what are you actually listening to? Are you listening to the words? That's what most if you take a conversational intelligence tool and you scrub it, so many times in sales, they're saying yes. Yeah, I
Mhm.
want to move forward. Yeah, this looks interesting. How many times have you heard, yeah, this is really interesting?
Oh, totally.
The words are
Yeah.
saying yes, and everything else is saying no. And it's funny because these are things that are a little bit harder to teach in sales, especially, not to get too spiritual with it, but in a culture which doesn't really help, like, enable us to focus on our intuition. And I think I just had I was kind of arguing with someone on LinkedIn.
You? No.
You know how I was like, in a very nice way. Uh, not
But did they know you
like
were
Nick.
arguing?
Um, but it's funny because
Conversation's
they were
fine.
like talking about how sales reps lie during forecasting calls, and I'm like, they're not lying. They're listening with
Yeah.
their minds, with their ears, but not with their intuition, you
Yeah.
know?
They're
It's interesting.
carrying the narrative that
Yeah.
was started by the manager. It's the same thing that I see with so Mel, like one thing I heard and reflecting on my experience was when I actually gave myself time to reflect and I wasn't so busy, I realized I was pushing my narrative and I wasn't helping build their narrative. So they
Mhm.
weren't following with me, they were being dragged along. So at the end of the day, when I finished that meeting, they were gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Melissa, question for you. I'm curious now when it comes to, learning, how are you mentioned two things. Like, one, how are you actually listening to, like, what's being said, in between the lines, and really, like, how are you listening to your intuition, kind of challenging them? Um,
Mhm.
like, yeah, how are you listening to your intuition more? And also, what does it look like for you to actually challenge people when you sense that what they're saying doesn't connect to what they actually mean?
Yeah. I do feel that naturally I have a very strong intuition. Um, I think that with that one deal, and a few in the beginning, I chose to ignore that intuition and just leverage my selective hearing instead. Um, and then as I've really leaned into, you know, sales is beyond just the theories and the deep questionings that you have.
Mhm.
There is a piece of you that really needs to look at this from a human to human, like try to connect with that person. And you're not trying to read their mind or like guess their next move, but like you are trying to understand, like, how comfortable do they feel on this call? How do they react when I ask them maybe a harder question? Can I push them to a point where I kind of not necessarily like pin them up against the wall, but they give me something a little bit more defined? what's their body language in that response? Or does their voice tremor? Or do they pause a little bit? Like those little things can help you pick up on how does this prospect really feel in this buying stage? Because if it makes sense logically, that's great. But it also needs to make sense emotionally. And they do need to feel that they're making both a logical and an emotional decision in order to purchase. And so, even though it might make sense logically going down the road, if they're feeling off about it,
Mhm.
then it's not going to go through. So, if you're noticing these little things throughout your deal, maybe it's time to take a step back and regain and refocus on what it is their mission is. Maybe dive in a little bit deeper on like their current day to day, the feelings that they're experiencing in their current solution, their feelings that they're experiencing while evaluating your solution. Really, like, what is it that you don't like? Tell me. Like, what about this dashboard is not going to help you, or what about this dashboard is preventing you, or maybe that our competitors have that we don't like I want to know the truth, um so that way I can then not necessarily like tell you about how our solution's better, but really just understand what this prospect is looking for in more detail. And if we don't have everything, then what do we have that we can help with that might ease them in that feeling? So it is interesting. I forgot where I was even going with it or what the original question was, because just the emotional side of sales, I feel like, is so important. Um, I'm that coworker that will randomly message someone and be like, I feel like something's happening today. Are you okay? And they're like, how
Mhm.
did you know? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I just felt it. Like, you just got to trust those, especially when you're on calls. Although it is really hard when their camera's off. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, it's so, because now I have to listen to the tonality and the voice changing, and I have to ask more questions and then think about how they're responding. It's so hard when they don't have a camera on.
That's what
Yeah.
I find so difficult about going from in person, because I
Yeah.
don't know about you two. I used to run tests throughout my presentation when I was in boardrooms to understand the power dynamics and who
Mhm.
was going to be doing the work versus who was going to be making the decision. So I'd ask different things or make different statements and watch who looked at who, how people were like, were they looking for a nod of approval before they answered the question, or, but I find like all of that disappeared with
Yeah.
going online. And so the stuff that we have to consider and like use our gut instinct, I feel like post COVID, it's completely different sales world.
Yeah.
And it just has never adjusted.
Can I tell you all a fun sales psychology party trick?
Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, Nick's got the party if you can't tell. You
yeah,
got the
even the
trick.
yeah. So it's actually from this book that's really old school. It's called The Magic of Rapport. Had me hooked. It's like a purple cover. I found it in Sandler Sales Trainer. One of my first sales trainers recommended it, and they say that if you're especially I find it works really well if you're like at a dinner with like 5 or 6 people, or when you're just having a really in-depth conversation with a few people, like at a party or just a gathering, whatever. But you'll notice something happens when you're really in, when everyone is like looking, they're really invested, involved in the conversation. Everyone's having the same conversation. You'll notice something happening where people's body, like they will be in the exact same position. And I love calling it out. I'm like, "Hey, everyone freeze. Look at how we're all sitting." And it'll be weird. It'll be like how often like this with like both
Yeah.
arms mirroring each other. Um, and it's funny because that will happen in sales calls. And so one of the tricks they say is to, once you notice that happening, someone mirroring you, which means that you're really aligned, you can also test something else to see if they continue to mirror you or if they lean back. And to your point, we do lose a lot when we don't have our camera on, but even more so in person when you can see a lot more, because even the interpersonal dynamics in a meeting room are really important, really interesting. And I love that you talked about it in terms of like really tapping into your intuition, but also it's not only your intuition, it's what that intuition is based off of, which is, we naturally pick up on others' body language and those cues.
Mhm.
So, really interesting.
I want to pull this up because
Mhm.
thanks, Chris, for throwing this in, Chris Bogue. This is one of the rare opportunities that we have now that we never had before,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right? Going back and looking at game tape and be like, they didn't respond to my email. And the three main points I listed for my business case was I out to lunch? Like, was that body language there? Did I actually get the confirmation? Were they following along? Because now, sales can be an evil learning environment because you don't get to see the aftermath. You don't sometimes like the one thing I don't understand is they broke up all the different steps. And so I don't know if the account I thought I booked a meeting for actually became a deal.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I don't get that feedback loop closed. So it's always open. You're like, I think I'm doing a good job, but I don't know because nobody tells me, or I don't get to
Yeah.
see, that. But now with stuff like this, we can close the loop ourselves and finally understand if our assumptions were right. And
Right.
that,
Just rewatching the tapes, and sometimes something that I just dislike is often when the tapes are recorded and I'm demoing, I can't see the prospect's reactions
Yeah.
in the recording. That kills me because I wanna see at what point did their eyes light up, you know? At what point did they, like, go, "Huh," or, like, take a note or, like, turn and be like, write something real quick. Like, those little cues, especially in a demo, are so powerful. So because that doesn't come through the recording, when I am demoing, I put it on 2 different screens. I don't know how people I don't know how AEs AE or how SDRs SDR with 1 screen. I have 3 and I leverage my TV as well because like I just need all the screens. But that's why it's so important for me to demo on 1 screen and have them here.
Yeah.
Also important for me to be looking at them as well. So that way, like it's a little bit more, you know, real. I don't know how to explain it, like
You're
personal.
building connection through eye
Yeah,
contact.
you wanna look at them. And so it's like showing something and then watching their reaction as you're showing so you
Yeah.
can see those not necessarily buying triggers, but more like interest triggers. Like,
could
okay,
almost be like
maybe
doing a PowerPoint presentation and like just staring at it the whole time with your back to the audience and be like, so now we're gonna go and click right, and they're reading the like verbatim off the slide, and you're like, oh my god, kill me now.
yeah.
So, one thing I have a little strategy I call attacking the wows and the whats. Because, like, it's so funny, even when people I hear so many times on sales calls where people are like, "Wow, that's really cool," and they're like, "Yeah, next slide," and you're like, "Dude, that is really important time to dig in,"
Yeah,
And those to your point, like, what questions are they asking? But also, so many times I hate the awkward pauses when people feel a question, but they're like, "I'm just going to now awkwardly pause
mm,
and wait for it." And it's such a weird moment in sales calls. But, I think that, what it does reflect is that intuition.
right.
So, I think that, like, we talked a lot about intuition and assumptions. And honestly, I'm excited to jump into this deal because I think that this is one of those situations where it seems like a lot went right, and it's probably what happened between the lines that we
Right.
knew.
One thing just before we go and jump
Mhm.
in. So I just want to bring this up, like little strategies like what Daniela just put. Just
Yeah,
sometimes she'll turn off her camera so she can just focus on who she's speaking to.
Mhm.
yeah,
Little tricks like that make all the difference, and people can tell when you're focused on them or not. And we've all been in an internal meeting where you know that 80% of the people are in their email or on LinkedIn or anything but paying attention to that meeting.
Right. I think that's my biggest pet peeve as a previous teacher,
Oh yeah.
now AE,
mhm,
when I see the disengagement, because I can't be like, "Pay attention or you're gonna lose a star." I think to myself, "Okay, they're not engaged, so either this is not interesting to them and I need to move on, or I need to ask them a question that will bring them back in.
Yeah.
Because your demos are not the most entertaining thing in the world. You know, like
Yeah.
you're walking them through something. You're also doing discovery at the same time. You're also trying to identify what it is that they care about, what is it that they don't care about, all while like moving your clicker and, you know, pointing things out. Like you're doing a lot in a demo. It's not just, let me just show you this product. Like, no, let me get them really excited about it and try to dig in a little bit more, but also be aware of all these little body language triggers. How do I keep them engaged? How do I make sure that they're being real with me and not just, yep, that sounds great. Yep, that sounds great. Because if you do a demo and the whole time they're like, yep, yep,
If they say anything.
yeah,
Most people don't even wait for them to say anything.
totally.
I have a little trick that I use, which I say like attack the purple bar, because on Gong, conversation intelligence tool, you know, the long monologues, they're like these long purple bars. And I'm like, the easiest way, if you're struggling with awkward pauses where they're just not saying anything, go to those long purple bars and figure out where in the conversation you're speaking
Mm,
longest, and go to those individual parts of, it's usually I was about to say slide, because I was like, it's usually a slide or the demo.
yeah,
Have strategic questions, place them right in the middle of those bars.
yeah,
Meg, how does
Not
that make you
as questions.
feel?
love it.
How does that make you feel?
Stop it. Nick makes fun of me because I'm constantly asking people in trainings, and even when I talk to him as a partner, I'm like, "Hey, so how do you feel about that? Like, hey, I just laid out, you know, kind of a plan. Like, how do you feel about that?" And he's like, "You always ask that." I'm like, and it's
And I'm
funny
not saying it's bad. It's just funny that it's like the go-to saying, but it works. Like it's always well timed
because
I,
and with
I ask
so
purpose.
you.
it's a hell of a lot better. And by the way, when we did cover that in our meeting, I was like, "Well, Morgan, how do you feel about that?" And he's like, "Nick, I like being asked that question. Stop nagging on Megan for asking how people feel about things, because it is a hell of a lot better than most people's default question. Any questions?
Yeah.
No, we're good. Okay, cool. Next part of the demo."
I ask how do you feel often because it's a deeper question because you are asking for their initial reaction, right? How are they feeling? Someone might feel differently about, you know, the dashboard than someone else. One person might be like, "This is the greatest thing I've ever seen," while another person might be like, "I've seen something like this in the past." You know, like you don't
Yeah.
really know until you ask that. I like pairing, how does that make you feel? And then comparing it. So, like, how does this specific dashboard make you feel in comparison to the spreadsheets that you're using today?
Yeah.
That's
That
a great
goes a little
question.
bit deeper and it kind of pushes them a little bit more towards like, you know, just being comparing their current like place to what it could be, the art of the possible in comparison to like, you know, their I told you my brain was mushy today, guys. I'm sorry. It was
That was so
very
good though, honestly. By the way, I feel like, one thing that's funny, I was just thinking, I'm honestly taking a lot of notes because, you know, intuition in sales is so interesting, and I'm just, like, trying to capture a few things that I wanna follow up on, and I literally just write, you know, 1, Nick, how asking people how they feel is good according to Melissa. Um,
Mhm,
but I love that, you know, contextualizing it, because so many times we just say, "How does this compare to your process? What is
mhm.
your current process?" And those are better questions than like, I think literally is like any questions is the one
Any questions?
I was like trying to think of like a mid ground, like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
but most people are just asking, 'Any questions?' Cool, next thing." And then at
Yeah,
the
and
end, they're
no
just like,
pause either. That's my favorite part. They're like, any questions as they're already changing the slides? Like,
Please.
no.
that are like
They're too
literally,
slow.
one, do this, not that. What questions do you have? Literally the easiest fix. If you constantly ask any questions, literally just ask, "What questions do you have?" I'm sure you should have a lot. But let's go ahead and jump to the deal. I'm like
Oh,
dying to
yeah.
get Melissa's perspective because I was stuck on this one. So I am curious from the audience. We have a lot of themes here, you know, a few that I heard. So, you know, we have a lot of expectations of this deal, which I think is tricky. I know a lot of times when you have a high value deal, we got a lot of pressure from sales leadership to make this into something, even if it's not. So I know Nick is going to be like, is this a real deal? But we had a really good meeting. And I'm like, what is a good meeting?
Mhm.
Had a really good meeting, ghosted after. But also, usually when I hear good meeting, there's not a lot of elements that actually are present in this deal. Building a business case, getting multiple people involved, a lot of, verbal, approval and excitement and things like that. So audience, type in like one, if you have someone that has a deal like this, go ahead and tag them. We're going to really get into the nitty gritty here, but also what are y'all thinking? And as you're typing out, like, Melissa, I'd love to hear your perspective on like what stood out here.
Yeah, for sure. We all get happy ears. It's all part of it, of course. That doesn't mean that this deal isn't real. It doesn't mean that. Like, really, it sounds like you've had a first good call, and good is it's so tough to really know if it's good because I can have a first date and be like, wow, that was great, and then never hear from that person again. Like that used to not really happen, but
I told you that in confidence, Melissa. Jeez.
I mean, now I'm like almost married, so it's okay. But you know what I mean? Like it happens. And you might not know why, or it's just both of you are leaving differently. The point is that you're having a conversation with someone and you're only able to understand your perception. And so your perception is your reality, their perception is their reality. So really it's how do we understand what their point of view is on that call? Because that's really how you know if this is going to move forward or not. So even when you end the call, ending it with like if you need to get next steps on the calendar. And if they're not giving you next steps on that call right then and there, or at least saying like, I'm just if that is a huge trigger, like that's how you know immediately, okay, they're either not going to prioritize this, maybe I didn't do enough explaining here, but if they're just really not interested in that next step or very hesitant or maybe we shouldn't bring in anyone just yet, like let's just keep it just me, like those are all those things of okay, I need to educate this prospect more in order to give them the knowledge to trust me and to trust the information that I'm giving to them. So how do we do that when a prospect, you leave the call, you now are waiting to see if you're going to hear back from them. You're not sure if they're going to come back or what's really going on. Your perception is that the deal or the opportunity or the first meeting went really well, but they're not responding. Maybe we need to take a step back and start from the beginning of that call. So rewatch your tapes, try to look for those triggers, try to see the body language, try to see what they were interested in, what they weren't interested in. If you were just over interrogating, asking too many questions, were you too much? And be reflective of yourself. Because even here at Deal, when we first started selling our new product, and I was the first AE to be specialized in this product, in the beginning I was like, I'm losing, man. And I really had to be realistic and say, is it me? Am I just not explaining this in the best way? And I couldn't look at what the product had and what it didn't have. I had to really look at me as a seller and try to make sense as to what is it that I need to do to make or to at least educate this prospect enough to feel confident into taking the next step. So if you can't do that on the call, there's plenty of ways on how you could do that beyond the call, because education doesn't stop at that call. You're constantly educating that buyer throughout your sales journey. It's not just the 30 minutes of FaceTime that you're getting every 2 weeks. You have to keep nurturing, keep helping that prospect. So rewatch your tape, try to find maybe some areas that you can help. Some areas that you can, I'm going to talk about video because that's what I do. It's powerful for a reason. It's really strong in your sales cycle. So for this rep, first reevaluate your calls, find those triggers, look for those gaps, and leverage video to start filling in those gaps. Because video is what evokes emotion, it's what gets people to feel a certain way, and what gets them to have that logical and that emotional connection together to make a good decision. And if they're not feeling it in one way or another, video can either pull on the logical piece or the emotional piece, and you can help them there. So I would suggest for this prospect to find those gaps and start to send a video to start uncovering those. So maybe following up with that prospect and saying, hey, you know, and you can send them a video just saying, hey, last time we spoke, I noticed that we didn't get the chance to talk about analytics. And you briefly mentioned that that was something that you don't have access to today. Here's why I think this is important. By pulling all of this data into one platform, you're able to make true workforce decisions or make true business decisions based off of your workforce and your costs, whatever it may be. But you're still feeding and adding more value. You're making those videos super short. Sometimes if you need to do 2 points, don't send them 5 videos in one email, but maybe if you want to do two, that's totally fine. I'll make 2 videos, one that's focused on one point that I want to make, another that's focused on another one, put the time commitment above it, or if you're using SendSpark or where you can actually put the time commitment on the thumbnail, you can do that. And then just list out what it is that you're going to talk to them about, like 1 minute video on advanced analytics for your team, whatever it may be. And then send that over to them and see if they like it or see if they're watching it, if they're engaged in it. Check in with them. Was that helpful? Was that not helpful? How can I be of more help? Anything like that you can use as well, but you want to keep educating and nurturing them throughout the cycle. The other piece to it is if maybe you've sent over pricing and now they've disappeared as well, maybe you want to give them a quick recap. Sending them another video, just walking them through the pricing, embedding that video into the presentation so that way they have it for their executive stakeholders. There's a lot of different areas and, websites that you can use. Buying isn't just those 30 minutes or selling isn't just those 30 minutes of FaceTime. There's so much in between that you can keep trying to get that prospect to feel comfortable and confident in your solution. That was quite a purple bar. So, oh, too nice to me.
Uh-oh, Meg, I think you're muted.
Thank you. I loved it. I think that there was so many interesting themes. A few that I heard, one, connecting the intuition to just like the human part of us. Like I love how just like when we get emails from our customers, I don't know about you, but I'm like, what tone was this? So many times I'm like, is this person really angry or are they really busy? You're kind of craving that seeing their face and knowing how they're responding. So I love tying that in with, not only assessing from their perspective, okay, if I think that this call went really well and they're not responding, being really self-aware and being like, I'm missing something.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably is what's happening in between the lines. Mm-hmm. So going back and reading those nonverbal responses is critical. And then responding in a very human way, bringing it back to that intuition of showing them that you're a human and like giving them that video response is so cool. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a big one. So I really focus on mid-funnel, qualification and really getting to know where we stand in every deal. But it's funny because you really touched on something that's hard, which is just reading in between the lines. And I think knowing where deals stand versus what prospects are telling you is really important. Nick, anything on your end? Because I have a few thoughts, but like Melissa just gave out some gold.
I also have to say, one thing I love about doing this is everybody has a different point of view based on their experience, so they see different things. And I think one thing I would like to do for this one is I want to tell you what I saw, the cue, and how it would change my approach. So the two cues that I saw that confused me were, So they use a challenger-esque problem statement to 3 decision makers.
Mhm.
At what level? So at
Yeah.
what level did they challenge them? At a market level? Was it something market driven that's going on in the world that's changing the world that they live in or that they work in? Was it at the account level? So was it something based on their company and the way it operates? Or was it to the executive level and something they care about? Because what I could see happening is the executive got really excited because it was something that touched on a pain that they is frequent and high impact for them personally, but the company's not going to pay for something personally all the time.
Yeah.
Totally.
You know, it can't always take on
They
every
don't.
pet project,
Mhm.
right? And then the one other cue that throws me off was they had next steps with introductions.
Mhm.
So
But
something
was it on the
happened.
calendar? Was that sent?
So from what I was told is that they had booked meetings with 2 or 3 other people that were going to be supporting them on building everything and getting the information they needed, and also one was going to be doing the implementation and someone was going to be, it was going to be their project, so they had signing authority, so they just wanted to be kept in the loop. So to me, I'm like,
Wait,
who closed the loop on their end? What happened in between that meeting and
but did
before all the other
the meeting
meetings?
but did the other meetings happen?
All ghosted.
Okay.
Right after the meeting, within 24 hours, everything disappeared. So to me, that cue tells me that somebody closed the loop internally,
Yeah.
but why? And I think it leads to that first question of that problem statement, that business case was based on what? And how much was built before they walked into that room versus during that call?
A few questions. The people that they brought in afterwards, are they higher level than the original person?
No, because they called
So they're
they,
lower
they
level than the
yeah,
original.
they had the original people were VP C-suite. The people they brought in were a blend of directors and managers that were going to be doing the work, and they also, one of them was finance.
Yeah. I wanna step in here because this real what I was thinking about was some of the cue for me, and honestly, it's funny because I feel like I'm bringing Melissa's, like, the intuition and the feelings behind it,
Yeah.
paired it with what you just mentioned, Nick, in terms of, like, what level is this at? Is it the right problem statement? I get worried when people, especially in a very early meeting, are too excited. Because and I see it happening at 2 different levels. If you're coming in at the executive level and they're like, "Yep, let's just get this done." I think to some of Melissa's point here is where she was going is like, when they try to sell this internally, it goes back to what you were saying about how do people feel about their current processes, because a lot of times executives are not aware of the internal processes that happen. So when they're like, "Hey, we're gonna just rip and replace this to solve this big issue,"
Yeah.
and the people who are actually doing it are like, "You were not aware of what goes into this.
Yeah.
You're gonna
Sorry,
break
what?
everything."
Yeah.
Excuse me? And
Mhm.
Yeah.
so for me, I think that what this could also represent is a like, I literally just was writing down, like, where did they get stuck selling this internally?
Mhm.
They could be super excited at if they're at an executive level, even asking that question of, "Hey, I know that, it sounds like we're really ready to go here. How is your team gonna feel about this? What processes are you is this gonna be replacing? Who's involved in those? Who developed those even? Are you gonna, like, rip and replace and throw away someone's baby?"
And when was it recently replaced? Did
Yeah.
they just get a new solution last year? Is this a brand new team or is this a veteran team? Are they
Mhm.
or how impacted are they going to be? Like, are they gonna be freaking out that they have now a new software that they have to adapt to, or are they finally getting used to this new software? And it might not be perfect, but they finally figured out how to make this report,
Mhm.
whatever, maybe they finally figured out how to do this. They finally have the structure for it. Are they scared to make that next change? Um, Totally. I mean, it definitely does sound like that exactly what you're saying. They were very excited in the beginning. C-suite buy-in. Whew, that sounds great. Like those are the ones who know that we have the money to do this, unless they asked afterwards. But it does sound like it was more of the second team
Mhm.
either feeling content with their current solution, not feeling challenged to challenge the status quo. Maybe it sounded like a lot of work. Maybe it would replace jobs, something like that you have to be
Yeah.
mindful of. It's really awkward when you have calls with people and you're talking to people whose jobs may be impacted by your solution. Um, it's a very uncomfortable situation to be in because sometimes that does happen and they're very much aware of it on the call. They see it, they notice it, they realize like I'm in jeopardy here. So if that is something, you might want to be aware if your solution is going to replace some roles. And when you bring on, the other people who would be part of that, having that conversation with the C-suite in the beginning, like, hey, just so you know, we're probably going to alleviate 90% of the work for this employee. Do you have other roles and responsibilities that you'd prefer for them to be working on? Or is it just this?
Yeah.
If it's just that, then you might want to consider allocating some new roles to them
So
because we're gonna be in this. Mhm.
one thing I want to bring up, because I think it just doesn't get talked about, but usually if the chicken and the egg question of which came first, the answer is usually the technology, not the process.
Mm.
So when we talk about the people in the process, the people that live in that process, most people don't know, especially at the C-suite level. They have no clue.
Mhm. Yeah.
So even it's hard to go and even broach those conversations. And I think what's really hard now is I don't see sellers doing research before. So like
Mhm.
mapping the earthquake, seeing how that value ripples out or the pain flows
Yeah.
through or the communication flows out and how they're reporting. So on like what you were just saying with implementation, that's one of the first things that I map to is like, okay, if you were to do this, could we deliver?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we can, is it good enough to be worth the pain of change? And
Mhm.
honestly, there's a lot of prospects that it's not. I can't see it because 6 months to 2 years of BS to go and get this thing running, even if it fits an initiative that they're working on, it may not be the best one to prioritize.
Yeah, and Nick, one thing that's so interesting, I think, about your process, which I've really learned and is really just for me is interesting, is when we talk about multi-threading, I think a lot of people think that multi-threading is just getting to the most senior person who has budget authority as soon as fucking possible and ignoring everyone else, like literally just like trying to get to those, or they try to just get other people involved in the meeting, like, "Oh, let's just get this person on the call." And for me, multi-threading is not only having people involved, but truly invested. And you do such a cool way of that by really getting people invested by doing research from lower level people, and not lower level people are not less valuable. We need to get that through our minds. They are not just cogs that we can step on. Like they might not have, you know, buying authority, but they can actually have veto power. I've
Mhm.
seen people, like, kill deals because 'cause they're like it actually came up in the very one of the very first deals that we covered, Nick, where, there was an executive who was at a current client and they just had recently acquired a company, and they're like, "Oh, you just need
Mm.
to do this." And I think that actually what happened was, like, the other people were like they didn't say no, they just didn't make progress.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, even from a change management, Melissa, I'm sure you have this on your side as well, working with salespeople. Um, there's like a quiet quitting version in the sales process where
So,
people will just not make progress and they're like, "Oh, you want this to happen? Cool. I'm just gonna honestly not do anything and just ghost these people
mm,
so that nothing happens." I think that's how a lot of lower level team members still have control within a sales process. If an executive wants something done, they're like, "Yeah, yeah, we'll investigate this," and they just don't really do anything.
Mhm. It goes back to that intuition too, and,
Yeah,
like, when we're on the call. I mean, for me, I just got off a call, and mine it sounds silly because, of course, I'm selling to the CFOs, but I'm selling, global payroll.
yeah.
So my payroll managers are the
Mhm.
most important people to me because they're the ones who are going to be
mm,
using this software every single day. They're the ones who are going to be in this. It's their burden to carry. It's for them that they have to learn. And I just got off a call right before this where really lovely. I want to like literally, I was like, oh, this girl's amazing. I love her.
Mhm.
A really lovely PRM or a payroll manager was just saying like, I don't really know what happens next. I don't make any decisions, and I said, yeah, but you have a voice, and that's what's really important. And so use your voice, whether you like it or don't like it, use that voice that you have because it's very powerful in the decisions that are going to be made. Because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, like you're the one who's doing this. So it just because they're lower, they're still important. They're still powerful. They still have a voice and they're a person. So they're going to have feelings, opinions, emotional responses, reactions to what it is that you're showing them. So be mindful of it and act accordingly. Because if you're not being, you're not leveraging your intuition or your social skills or continuing to educate them throughout the sales cycle to fill those gaps, then you're never going to know why, what they didn't like, if there's a future ever, or if that person really did like you. And maybe in the next company, they'll try to bring you in next time. You just need to keep digging in a little bit more, but don't avoid the physical cues either. Like don't avoid what you're seeing on calls.
Yeah, and literally so
Yeah.
much. And I think that it really goes back to a core thing, which is we don't know what happened. We don't know. I think we have some hypotheses around like it probably broke down after this person who was super excited tried to go and internally sell this. And it's funny because with multi-threading, I think that we're always like, okay, let's actively thread the needle. Let's get people involved. I literally had a question on a coaching call yesterday. How do I make sure that people are get on to the next meeting? And I was like, it's not by telling them. It's
Yeah.
not by having someone be like, you have to meet with this person because this like we're doing this. I think the first step is doing some of that almost like pre-threading. Um, how do we consider their perspective? How do we almost like future proof it by asking the person, what are they going to think? Hey, so I'm having these two meetings with these two people. Tell me a little bit more about how they're going to be involved. By the way, have you thought about like what their perspective is going to be? Even I love the question of like, okay, hopefully they're excited, as excited as you, but I bet they're also gonna have some questions and concerns even
Hmm.
before they join that next meeting. Like, what do you think some of those are gonna be? And
Totally.
getting them to think through not what could go right. Champions get happy ears too.
Hmm.
And also, they're not salespeople. Most people aren't selling to salespeople like me and Nicholas are, which is actually really fun and horrifying. But most people aren't selling to salespeople. So you also have to realize they're not always in that sales mindset of what could go wrong. They're like, yeah, I'm just going to set up these meetings with you and these other people. It's going to go perfectly. But really getting them into like, what could go wrong? How are these people going to feel about it? Asking all of those questions that we've covered is really critical, and helping other people consider like helping them tap into their intuition as well. Because even some questions, Jen Allen Knuth posted some really good questions that related to this a few days ago, and a lot of them were about like just asking about those considerations, on the
Yes.
team. And I think that asking some of those questions, like who's going to be who could be the biggest naysayer, or however you want to say that, who would be against this or who would be concerned about this.
Hmm.
Asking those, essentially also de-risking your deals is key.
Which I
Totally.
think you have to start with. Like, I
Yeah.
know we're kind of coming up at the time that
Mhm.
we kind of have to button it up. But the one thing I will say is where I started with my prospecting before I actually made it into the natural disaster that works was willingness to learn and ability to change,
Yeah.
or even a willingness to change, right? So like going back on this deal, what I would do if I would if I'll tell you right now, it's not a deal. It's a lead.
It's
Yeah,
not a
it's
There's
deal. Like,
there's no
that's,
business
like,
case.
100% sure.
There's no business case with a champion to mobilize it. So there's nobody mobilizing change. It's not a deal. So to
Yeah.
And also,
me,
wait,
it's
I'm
just a
so
lead.
sorry. You cannot build a business case within a discovery call. Like, you can build, like, a business hypothesis,
Mhm.
but there's no business case, like, you just don't have enough time, so, like, there's a lot of questions there.
I would
But
argue
yeah,
that the
question.
hypothesis should have been built in prospecting and validated by prospecting. But that's my opinion. So what I would say is go to the trenches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk to some people that live in that workflow that they were about to get, because it was an enterprise deal and there was a lot of different workflows that were going to change. Find out if they knew about it. Did it actually make it to the trenches?
Mhm.
And find out if it's even worth it.
Yeah.
And I would
Yeah.
just find 2 or 3 and start there and figure out the 2 or 3 different divisions that would be affected by that change. And honestly, if the answer is no in all of them, move on. That would be
Mhm.
my button up of this.
Yeah, and so, Nick, I love that you're coming at it from the perspective of do your research and find out what happened. Don't, and Melissa, you kind of started off with, okay, let's actually go back to the video, go back to the reel, figure out what happened in between the lines. Like, where did I make assumptions about this was going really well? For me, I always think about like what are the risks here?
Mhm.
Really figuring out what went wrong. Nick, you talked about, okay, going back into the deal, talking to those additional stakeholders, really like trying to validate, trying to figure out what went wrong. And for me, I think, and Melissa, I also loved your idea of coming back with that video, which is very
Mhm.
human, where they can see those reactions. And it's also just more engaging than like, hello, just checking in.
Yeah, give
Check-
them something.
And you
Yes.
can
We're on
share it too.
offense.
So for
To
me, I think tying in one final strategy on my end is like, it's okay to do what Scott Sambucci and a lot of people call like falling on your sword, which is actually after you do that reel and talk to the team, hopefully you get some responses, even just sending in a video like, hey, so I was reviewing the video and I know a lot of things went really well, but I think some things that, there are some things that I missed. I'm just curious, here are some things I think that could have potentially gone wrong. I'm just curious, like, are any of these right? I don't want to keep pestering you, but I do have a few ideas around maybe where this could have gone wrong. A lot of times I when I have people who are really excited, they go to their team and there's some concerns or there's some considerations that you didn't realize
Mhm.
should be taken into consideration. A lot of times that's, what's the team doing today? How is this actually going to impact them? So I'm just really curious, even if it's just me getting some feedback on where I could be better next time, I would really appreciate knowing, kind of where you're at, totally in how I should approach this. Should we move forward, or do you think that there's not really, uh, because of some of those things that you learned, this isn't really going to happen? Happy with either one, but just giving that, like, falling on your sword, getting vulnerable,
Mhm.
not trying to push along the deal, but literally saying like, I need just some feedback, some help to understand what
Mhm.
happened, to understand, should I stop reaching out to you or should we keep going? I think it'd be really effective.
beautiful summary. What's the topic for next week? I now that we've got through this one and we got some strategies.
Yeah,
Now,
who's joining?
why? Yeah, who's joining?
We
Why should
have
people come back?
we have Richard Smith, who, one thing that I love about him, he is so brilliant, but also just so succinct and so real and so authentic, but very strategic. I think there's a lot of different sales personalities out there, but what I love about Richard is that he really is smart, but also not aggressive with sales. It just makes sense. So I'm
Mhm.
really excited to have him as a co-host, and I love all these different perspectives, Nick. It's been really fun. And we're going to be focused again on deals. So we have a seller who is in a pretty tricky environment, just got into enterprise deals and is really struggling, doesn't have a lot of support, feels like she's not really learning that much, and so she's really struggling knowing some of being able to address, just like we covered today, what truly is happening in her deals, because she thinks that she's doing everything right and it's just not working.
Mhm.
I think a lot of us can feel that, especially when we go from, small, medium, into enterprise. So it's going to be really exciting. Can't wait for people to join. We'll have more deal details tomorrow, so we can kind of preview and see if it's relative and if it resonates with people.
Well, guys, circle back, come to our profiles, and you'll see that event go out. If you guys need more help, if you're dreading the Monday morning meeting, if you hate looking at your CRM because you know that your manager is going to be asking you for details because your pipeline just isn't where you would like it, maybe it sucks. We've all been there. Or maybe your pipeline just isn't going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Reach out to me and Meg. If you need help with getting good pipeline that closes, reach out to me, Nicholas Thicket. If you need to go and close the pipeline that you already have, talk to Meg and Melissa.
Yeah.
Besides following this incredible person, because you're going to go and up your sales just by following her content every day. But what else? How can people stay in touch and get your help?
You guys gonna call me or what? Sales support line, give us a call. The team of 10 will be happy to answer any calls that you have. Of course, they're really fun. So give us a call. I know you'll put the number. I don't have the number memorized. It's 303. Do you have
I'll
that
go
number?
in.
I should actually. Oh, it's 303-578-8581. Give us a
That's so
call.
quick. Well done.
I only have like 1 or 2 numbers memorized, so it makes a lot of sense.
That was impressive.
But thanks so much for coming on the show today. It's been so much fun to geek out on intuition and sales and just that human approach, and also self-awareness, figuring out what went wrong when I think we all have some sales blind spots. So really appreciate your perspective. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
And guys, we need your help. If you know someone that appreciate the show, either tag them in the comments or when the next event comes out, invite them. Thank you so much. And Melissa, Meg, as always, I appreciate you guys. See you guys next week.
Thanks, y'all.